All right. Well, here with us today is Dr. Sharad, Dr. Paul. He's a world renowned skin cancer specialist, family physician. He's an evolutionary biologist, storyteller, social entrepreneur, and adjunct professor at Oakland University of Technology. And so, Dr. Paul, his accomplishments include receiving the Awata International Excellent Award for his leadership in global health improvement and patient centered care. Now, Dr. Paul's latest book, Biohacking Your Genes 25 Laws for a Smarter, Healthier, and Longer Life, explores how we can optimize our well being by making choices that align with our unique genetic blueprint. And so the book shifts the focus from simply living longer to living better, prioritizing health span over lifespan. With practical guidance on lifestyle, diet, and behavior, he shows readers how to take actionable steps toward long term vitality. And so today, Dr. Paul will discuss the science behind gene based biohacking. He'll share with us how simple changes rooted in genetics and evolutionary biology can lead to better health, enhanced longevity, and a more empowered approach to wellness. And so, how are you today, Dr. Paul?
I'm very good, thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Yes, and we're excited that you are up early to talk with us this morning.
Yes.
It's afternoon for us,
Yeah.
but we appreciate you doing that. And so when we were looking at all of your bio, your profile, you've been described as a polymath. And I was like, okay, let's look at this. And so it says with more than 25 years in medical practice, you know, we're trying to figure out how have you managed to cultivate and sustain such a wide range of interests and talents and excel in all of them. So we want you to just to tell us the tea. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I think, look, firstly, um, it's the power of curiosity and the power of storytelling. And it's really, as we know in neuroscience and things, curiosity stimulates the hippocampus of the brain, which is your memory area, and it also triggers your dopaminergic area, which is your reward center. So you literally become more motivated to learn more, but also you become more, remember more things, and you become more motivated to learn more things which are unrelated to your field as well, right? So I always joke about the fact I'm full of useless information, right? Because you sort of read upon many other things you get interested in and you go down the track. Now, earlier you mentioned me as a storyteller because I do write fiction, but the reason stories are important, as Dee would also say from medical diagnoses, is look, if you construct a story, and when I teach storytelling to children in schools, which is one of our charitable programs I run, is that look, you're teaching them to first you set the context, which is effectively in modern days you'll say like define your brand or business or the disease, and then you develop the characters, you develop each train of thought within it, and then you resolve conflicts. So you start resolving things which don't seem right. And that is actually a parable, literally, for medicine, or to become a better doctor, to become a better listener. It's even for patients. It's a parable for, I suppose, running your business. And so I think so that those are perhaps the two things I would say which inherently, if you follow, that does offer you a sort of a path into how you can do many things and still keep interested. Whereas if you just focused on one aspect, if you said, I'm only doing this just to make money, or I'm only doing this just for this, I think you may still become successful, but I don't know whether you are just as happy and energized to get up at 6:30 in the morning, 30 years later.
No, right? But it's so great to hear because I was just doing, and Dr. D was at this function too. I was just talking about the importance of intellectual wellness, meaning it's still good for us to seek knowledge, and understanding and skills, because it is a part of our health and well-being as well. And so I'm so glad to hear that, you are really promoting, storytelling and knowledge and skills, and because it makes us interesting. What do you say to that, Dee? Does it make us interesting?
It does. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I always teach when I mentor my medical students and residents, you have to have something else other than medicine. You have to have varied interest. How boring to go to a party with a doctor that just talks about medicine. Okay, I'm going to the next person. And one of the questions I used to ask, I was on the admissions committee for medical school, and one of the admissions questions I used to ask was, "What? Tell me the last book that you've read."
Mm,
You know, but
mm-hmm,
I do want to get into so you said that genes are our blueprint and not our destiny. And in your book, well, just to start off with, and I guess, you talked about a couple people that really caught my eye, Glenn Campbell, and of course, Chris Hemsworth.
Yes.
And so, can you just elaborate on a little of that? I mean, there wasn't a lot that you said about Hemsworth lifestyle, but there certainly was with Glenn Campbell. And you went a lot of depth into Alzheimer's, and there's so much to talk about. But maybe we could focus a little bit on the Alzheimer's stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think I spoke a little bit about it partly because it was also a personal journey because my father has Alzheimer's. And so I think he's alive, but he's quite advanced Alzheimer's. And he was a surgeon. And I was more curious when he was diagnosed, they were really not any medications, not that there are any even now, which make a big difference. So I was really more interested in following the science and looking at, let's try and understand this disease a bit more. So that is the personal reason why it took me down that path. But to answer your question about genes being a blueprint, not a destiny, is as you know, in medicine and in life in general, is everything is a bit of nurture and a bit of nature, right? So we have all inherited a certain types of genes, which means you have to be prudent because certain diseases, obviously, if you have a breast cancer or a melanoma, whatever it is, cancer, you will always, and in your family, then you have a higher risk. If you actually have certain diseases, you have a higher risk. But it's not your destiny because there are lots of things in our lifestyles we can do which genes are fundamentally just protein makers. And that's why, Richard Dawkins wrote the book, The Selfish Gene. The idea is genes just make protein. So we in human beings, we try to look at things in an ownership model, like I own my house or my car or my genes. No, it isn't like the genes evolved across a species. And human beings, we are all very much the same, whether we're from Africa or Asia or, largely as a human species, we're quite homogeneous. So I guess one of the issues, so using Chris Hemsworth's thing, so if you, for example, had a gene which had a higher risk of Alzheimer's, like the APOE4 variety, then what happens is there is actual evidence that if you increased your aerobic exercise significantly as opposed to your weight kind of exercise, that you actually reduce the onset of it and you delay it. So there is actually clear evidence in studies which have shown that pushing your aerobic activity reduces the onset time, even in or increases the delay before you get it, even in people with the faulty gene. But also, we know in the book I talk about the MIND diet, which was, it was an acronym for the Mediterranean Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. And what it's basically is, it's things like, eating a lot of blueberries. I mean, I could take you through it in detail, but the reality is those kind of diets have been shown to actually make a 50% difference. I mean, like, it's massive. So, even in medicine, we don't do enough prevention, right? Because everybody prefers to come and see a doctor and have a quick fix, whether it's a pill or a thing, because it's much more easy. But the reality is, we evolved in relatively short period of time. Over, say, man has been around 200,000 years. And really, our modern civilizations, which we get hung up about, are literally a very small time frame in it, maybe 5,000 years. So, really, for most of the time, people wandered around. They ate what was there, which was just animals, some plants, some weeds. There was none of the hybridized stuff or none of the processed stuff that we consume too much of. So all these things therefore have an impact in the kind of proteins we produce in our bodies, which may be harmful because we didn't actually evolve to eat so much processed stuff. We didn't evolve to eat so much stuff with plastic in it and all that kind of stuff. So, and that has an impact in how our diseases progress. I guess using this analogy for other things. So you and I know in medicine, like for example, I deal with skin cancers a lot, and it's very high incidence down under because we actually have the highest UV index in the world, right? So we have very, very strong sun. And so again, it's the same genes and environment. Of course, if you have a family history of a higher risk, so which means you need to be extra careful. But on the other hand, if you didn't have a family history, if you still went out and burnt your skin to a crisp, of course you're going to develop a higher risk anyway. And the same thing goes for smoking. So they're going for many other, women drinking too much now, and we know increase the risk of breast cancers and things like that. So I guess for everything, there's an environmental impact, which is our internal environment, which is what we're consuming, and our external environment, what we're exposed to, be it pollutants or and I think on this line, I was just thinking of pollutants. There was a recent study in JAMA, which it was slightly controversial, but they did a study around golf courses in America, and I think you may have seen that. Like they said, those who lived within 1 mile of a golf course had much higher risk of Parkinson's disease, and then those who lived within 2 miles and but within the water catchment area had another like a 30%, but it dropped off once you were like about 2.5 miles away. And they think it's the pesticides, what they
Mm,
use to maintain them, which
Oh,
leach into the
wow.
water and they get into the waterways. Anyway, so all these kind of things. So which means you may then be wealthy and you may be living in a, a golf club, but literally we're still having pollutants just to make it look beautiful, which go into the water, which you're then consuming, and it all sort of comes back to the circle. So the reality is, genes are blueprints, so they sort of give us risks and benefits as well. But on the other hand, they're not our destiny. You can modify them if you want to. But one thing I would say is, look, I've said this many times because, like with this curiosity, I also studied, medicine, law, ethics, few other things. And the reality is, like, just like law doesn't always translate to justice, medicine doesn't always translate to health unless you take personal responsibility. And I think that's my message to people is you need to take some charge of your health and say, what do I want for myself? This is our only chance in this form in life. And right. So do you want to live your most optimal life? Do you want to do all the things you want to do? Then only you can, take that action. You can't just simply expect to go and see a doctor once a month and him or her fix things for you.
right. But then the question is, okay, so that sounds great. Um, but what are some of the things that we can do and to make sure that even though in my line of family and family history, there's strokes, there's hypertension, things of that nature. So what can I do to make sure that at least, you know, it can help me so that I won't go down that pathway? And is that what biohacking is? So
Yeah.
explain biohacking, and then what can I do, or a person that has that family history of hypertension or stroke or heart disease, what can we do? Is that a part of the biohacking the genes?
In my view, it is. So typically when people look at biohacking, look, if people sometimes take it to the extreme, like almost do it yourself kind of gene modifications, which happens in America, or you see it on, the Netflix shows and things like that, right? And like people, everyone taking rapamycin and things like that. It was quite interesting, the rapamycin thing. I'm on a New Zealand committee, which dermatology committee of pharmac, which is, I suppose, like an FDA kind of a body. And many years ago, we were looking at rapamycin for angiofibromas, like a skin tumors on the face. And so I was actually asked to prepare a report on it. So I actually know the background history of it, which was on Easter Island, where it was just a soil fungus, and the Canadians were studying the island to see what would happen pre and after they put an airstrip to study civilization in there, and they found this fungus, and then it got commercialized, and they never ended up following up on the study. So it had a lot of side effects. So in my thing, I'm always horrified when people just willy-nilly prescribe it to people. So my version of biohacking is the more, I suppose, evidence-based, the more, yes, largely do-it-yourself model, but largely focusing on diet and lifestyle, and maybe some targeted supplements. But for some people, it's of course much more interventional. So it's the term is a bit used loosely, I guess, in that way. I must say, I just chose the term largely because this book, Biohacking Your Genes, is a little bit more bite-sized. Modern audiences are not reading as much as I would like, right? Where we read less and less and people have shorter attention spans. So it's meant to be exactly like what you said. If you read the book literally, you will get tips on many things you can do. But for you personally, and Vicky, seeing that you just now asked me what you can, if you have a family history of, strokes and heart disease, then of course the first thing is your salt in your diet. You literally need to cut out salt in your diet. The second thing is folic acid supplements, probably along with B12. Even if your diet's really good, there's plenty of evidence now. Interestingly, there's plenty of evidence. You don't have to overdo it. Just 400 micrograms folic acid a day, and or added with maybe 500 micrograms vitamin B12. Interestingly, in female, it's also females particularly. This doesn't translate to males. It's shown to reduce the aging of your DNA. So in studies, you know how as you get older, your telomeres shorten, and that has actually been shown to be reduced in studies on females who take more folic acid. But interestingly, both men and women have people. What folic acid does is folic acid is almost like a building block for your one carbon metabolism, right? So I'll just digress a bit, and so sorry if this gets a bit too sciencey, but what it is basically, look, life evolved on Earth, and it's all carbon-based life, right? We don't know why on our planet it is carbon-based, but it is. So every building blocks are based on carbon metabolism. And so if you think of it like little Lego blocks, which is building your cells, then folic acid is a one carbon donor. Largely, so what happens is that's why green leafy vegetables are very good for you because obviously they're all rich in folic acid. And most people actually, if you're eating plenty of green leafy vegetables, you consume enough. But what we now know is that the key thing is about not in the genes there's a little balance between optimal methylation, which means adding a methyl group to the carbon. So the carbon comes in many forms like CH4, CH3, CH2. So the thing is, and folic acid donates one of these carbons. So what really happens is we're trying to prevent the accumulation of homocysteine in cells, and that increases your risk of heart disease and strokes directly. So, on one hand, having more folic acid directly shown to reduce heart disease and strokes by reducing the homocysteine you accumulate. Then, in the second part of folic acid, what it does is there is a methionine restriction, different amino acids. So, what it means is that you actually end up aging less. So I think on all counts, for you, the biggest dietary modification would be avoiding anything out of a packet, right? Largely because that means they'll have salt in it to preserve it, most cases. Look, one of the things I've always said is that anything which, as much as possible, if you can follow it, and I do find it bit difficult when I travel to America because there's just so much more processed stuff than we have. I don't mean this badly. I just mean as an observation, like I come there and everything is packaged and compared to here. And what we find is that it is very, therefore, very salty. And so anything which has to be added to a food to increase its shelf life, thereby reduces your shelf life on this
Mm,
planet, right? So, so I
yes.
think the less you can eat out of a packet is actually better for you. So for you with a family history, it's all the more important because that's one way of reducing salt. The second way, of course, is in your own cooking, just literally get used to not having salt. And we know this is a behavioral thing. Like salt was originally just used as a preservative because we didn't have refrigeration, we didn't have other things, right? And studies have been done in my previous book, The Genetics of Health. I talk about the studies done in children show that kids who eat salty or sweet foods very early in life later on get completely addicted to these things as well.